All right, everyone, welcome back to Visions for the Future of Higher Ed. Today, I am extremely excited to welcome back one of our previous guests. Dave Marchick is back with us today to talk about some of the evolutions and changes at the Kogod School of Business. And back with him is a new guest and someone I'm really excited to hear insights from. This is Kelli Frias here, one of the professors at American University, who's going to talk to us a little bit about what is happening on campus and some of the changes that have been made. For those of you who haven't seen the previous episode with Dave, I highly encourage it. It's part of a 3-part series at AU talking about the changes in AI and how leadership has approached bringing this into the school. But let me give you a quick background on our guest today before we get into asking them some questions. Dave Marchick is the Dean of the Kogod School of Business at American University, where he leads a program serving over 2,000 students. And since becoming the Dean, he has launched major initiatives in AI, sustainability, and entrepreneurship. Prior to his role in higher ed, he held senior leadership positions across public service and global businesses, including being COO of the U.S. Development Finance Corporation and managing director of the Carlyle Group. So thank you, Dave, for being back with us here today. Really excited to hear about the changes you've been making. And a quick background on Dr. Kelli Frias here. Kelli is an associate professor of marketing at Kogod, known for research at the intersection of marketing, strategy, pricing, and healthcare markets. She's a Kauffman Foundation fellow and has secured nearly $2 million in NSF funding, plus major grants supporting applied research. So really excited to hear about how you're implementing some of these changes from leadership, Kelli. And to kick off our conversation, Dave, I wanted to ask you, since we last spoke, Kogod has already rapidly adopted AI and is running regular sessions to help faculty understand how these tools work, hear their questions and concerns, and a lot of those changes have already been implemented. So what does that mean now in practice for you? What has changed since we last spoke in August? I'm excited to hear some updates from you.
Thanks again for having us, and I'm really thrilled that Professor Frias is with us because she's actually the one doing a lot of this stuff, and I'm kind of overhead. And I think when you hear from her, it's really amazing and innovative. The biggest change since the last time we spoke, I would say, is that we reached a tipping point in the summer of 2025 where we were trying to drive change and create momentum. And suddenly there was this tipping point where everybody got on board at the school and we saw a major cultural shift. So, the data is very strong. 90% of our faculty are using AI in their classes. We have an AI major, a minor. We have a new grad degree in AI. AI is infused into every part of our school, our curriculum, every major, every minor, every department. The biggest change is really we have a culture of AI experimentation and adoption where honestly, I don't even know everything that's going on within our classroom. In fact, Professor Frias would tell you about a class that she basically reinvented in the fall, which I didn't even know about until I showed up for the final presentation. So our faculty is AI open, AI curious, and AI kind of experimental. And that's driving just huge changes in our classroom and really benefiting our students so that they also are AI curious and AI experimental.
That's amazing to hear, Dave. And I'm continuously blown away by how quick the adoption has been at AU. But I think it comes from that trial and error mindset that you have really reinforced that it's okay to try things. Let's see what works. Let's see what doesn't work. To get to 90% of the faculty adopting AI and getting excited about it, I have heard it's starting to reinvigorate a lot of faculty's energy and is getting people are getting very creative with it. So I think it's a good sign that there are things happening that you might not have directly spearheaded because it sounds like it's starting to grow really naturally and organically. And so I'm excited to have Dr. Frias here with us as well to talk a little bit about the course, Kelli. Um, just for some quick background before we get into the program itself, I'd just love to hear a little bit about your journey. What has it been like, getting to where you are now, and how have things changed, as a faculty member over the past couple of years for you?
Yeah, so that's interesting perspective to think about how it's changed for faculty because I think we've really become students again, or we should be becoming students again. So I just finished up taking a course on agentic operating systems, and I feel like we're really in this space where I'm learning with the students. And as Dave said, part of this, I think, is having a mindset of experimentation, when in many ways can be uncomfortable, right? When students come into the classroom and they're thinking the professor should know everything. At this point, the tools are changing so quickly, the processes are changing so quickly. I think we're in this together. And so when I try to instill in my students that we're building, that the idea is that we're going to build from day one, and that day one building may shift over the semester. So there's a little bit of discomfort in that.
Absolutely, but I think that's one of the most interesting approaches happening at AU is that there is a willingness to, express to the students that, hey, we are trying something. Let's learn together. I think that creates, again, that leadership by example. We're asking students to do something new that they haven't done before, but faculty are, again, leading by example, saying, hey, we're using it too. That's amazing that you yourself have just taken that course. I think that's going to reinforce the students that, hey, we need to continuously learn about this. And with something like that in mind, Kelly, to ask you kind of the other question on my mind so far is, um, what sorts of tools have you brought into the classroom? What sorts of things are you using? Um, and why have you chosen some of these tools? There are so many now. When
Yeah.
Dave and I spoke, I feel like we were talking about a few select tools that everyone knew. And within, the span of less than, just about 6 months here, there are so many tools available. So are there some that you're using specifically, and is there a reason behind that for you?
Yeah, so the first day of class, we talk about two tools, and the first is Notebook LM. So I really like, and I've advocated for this tool with my students, particularly because they're using these RAG databases where we can upload these PDFs, and we're ensuring with student communication that they understand that they can go and pull information. So they can put all of my slides in Notebook LM. I'm perfectly happy with that. And they can use that to test themselves, whether that's through a quiz or a podcast. But the way they're doing that, I think, is super beneficial in the sense that they're learning what to query. And we're creating those kinds of spaces, I think, in creating legitimacy around using AI tools, as opposed to saying, well, we don't really want you to use AI when we know our students are using AI. So, first day of class, we use Notebook LM. And then the second tool we use first day of class is Typebot. And so I want students, and I think one piece of this that's really important is if we move past this prompting to creating something. So the moment they can take a chatbot and actually make something with it, make it work. So we do a very simple exercise on how to build a blog post, but it's a way for them to see a tool in action. They also learn about API keys and security first day, and then they build out something that creates content, right? And we start moving throughout the semester with this notion of building as opposed to just prompting.
That's a really interesting point. I haven't heard as much conversation around actually building out AI tools. And I think Casey Evans from the AU team actually spoke about that in the mini series as well when we did the initial interview with AU. So that's really incredible to hear. That's continuing as a trend at American University here. What has the reception been like, Dave? Have you heard from students so far about how they feel about bringing AI into the classroom, and do any stories come to mind for you?
Let me tell you a story about Kelli Frias.
Ah,
So she is a marketing professor. She's a wonderful scholar. She's a great leader. What I didn't know about her was that she was a great innovator. So she emailed me maybe in November and said, "Hey, you might want to come check out the students' final presentations in class." And so I always like to hear from students, see what they're doing. So I went. And this was an advertising and marketing class for non business students. So think there was a dancer, there was a photographer, there's a PR person. They're creative types. They're also non quantitative. They hate math. They don't like doing quantitative stuff. They don't want to do data. They all learn to program and create a portfolio of apps in Professor Frias's class. Okay, so it was incredible. They had a client. They created two programs. One was a tool to create social media posts for influencers who were promoting a particular line of clothing. And the second was a dashboard for the owner and managers of that line of clothing so that they could monitor their influencers and their ambassadors' social media posts and the impact of those social media posts on shopping, purchasing, and clicking through. And so what was really cool about it was I asked the students at the end, I'm like, okay, so how many of you are quantitative? None of them. How many of you came into the class thinking AI was like the devil and you never wanted to use it? All of them raised their hands. How many of you thought that you could create your own software, write your own code, and create your own applications at the beginning of the class? Nobody raised their hands. And how many of you are going to use this skill and this kind of knowledge and entrepreneurial mindset that Professor Frias taught you for your own craft, for photography, for dance, for PR? And they all said yes. So what this led me to think about was taking what Kelli had done and drive it to the next natural extension, which is in the same way that a photography student has a portfolio when they graduate, or an architecture student has a portfolio, why can't business students have a portfolio of applications that they've created in their own field, in marketing and finance and accounting, so that they not only have the fundamentals of whatever they're studying, in this case, advertising, but they also now can show employers internship opportunities that they can actually create something to solve problems for the business in which they pursue. I think it's incredible what she's done, and we now want to replicate and blow up what she's done to expand it to the rest of the school. One other thing, I went back and looked at her syllabus, and I said, Kelli, none of this was in your syllabus. And she said, well, I posted my syllabus in March. Students signed up for my fall class in April. And like you said, Imran, all of these tools came out over the summer, so I just made it up. How many faculty members across the country are just making stuff up based on new technology and applying that technology to the same age-old class that your father, your mother took in business school? So I think what she's doing is incredible, and we want to do more of it.
Oh, that is
Thanks, Dave.
incredible. I'm so glad you invited Kelli to be part of the episode today, Dave. That is truly incredible. And there are so many things I think we can learn from that story, Kelli. And I have questions about, how, the approach you took to do that. But just to highlight a couple of things that I have seen in my experience, I do feel like, once that syllabus has been put in, it can sometimes feel like a box people have put themselves in, and I see a lot of resistance to do anything that wasn't put in that syllabus. In March, like you said, 4 things that are happening in September. So it's a really uplifting story to hear that, hey, you changed, you adapted to what was happening. And I think in a really interesting way, I'm starting to see this trend develop around using AI to teach lessons in a context that is interesting, genuinely interesting to the student. Now not all students have to learn or prepare the same marketing case study. They can do it for all these different fields. And to me, it really speaks to me, Kelli, the work you're doing, because I have a creative side as well. I resonate with that group you're talking about, Dave. And that's a group of people who have these skills, but are going to be forced to do some marketing for themselves and advocate for themselves. So what an incredible tool set to give them, Kelli. And what was the process for you like? The thing I'm starting to wonder is, what kind of questions are students asking as they try to navigate these new tools? What sorts of things did you, need to help them figure out along the way?
Well, I think the first part of any of the projects that we do has to start from data. And I always talk to my students about consumer data and collecting primary data. And so this was no different. So when we went out and collected our initial data, this was a collaborative project with a company. So as Dave mentioned, this was a startup. It's a college focused clothing line, sustainable products. And so we wanted to understand who's buying their products, who are their brand ambassadors. And at that point, they had about 300 brand ambassadors around the
Wow.
country. And so they were trying to understand, why weren't their brand ambassadors posting? What was happening? And so we went out and we actually did interviews and surveys trying to understand who not only their customer was, but who the brand ambassador was. And for me, that's really the starting point. Before we get into any sort of AI build, we need to understand what it is that we're building and how is this functional and important to the business. So once we had that collective of data, we started to figure out ways that we could use that to translate that into something that's important from a tech perspective. So I'll give you an example. One of the kind of findings that we had from the data we collected was that the folks that they had hired as brand ambassadors really weren't sure how sustainability worked for their company. So they really wanted kind of sustainability 101. And then they wanted to know, how do they post about that and have that in some way reflect their customer base? And so we built, and the students did an amazing job. So we built a chat bot, and that chat bot then was embedded into the app. And as Dave said, the app was meant for both brand ambassadors and then admin to track who was posting and what they were posting. But we could also see with that chat bot who needed some more education on sustainability and who needed to understand sustainability for a particular product. And at that point, the company was just using kind of monthly Slack meetings, but they weren't getting the dialogue that they wanted. And so this was a new way to create dialogue. And the students, I mean, it was amazing to see what they could do. And then to hear back from the company, just they had never thought about actually educating via an app. So it was a wonderful experience.
That really is that again is a new trend I'm seeing. This departure from typical surveys and meetings to try and collect that information to try and make it more conversational so that people can talk through some of these challenges they're having. That's really interesting to identify that again, kind of like you said, just from the data you were seeing. What an interesting approach, and that company must have been very excited to recognize
Yes.
that. Um, yeah, that makes me think another thing here, Kelly. I was wondering again now, as students are going through this, something I have heard, kind of ripple throughout education has been that students are looking to use AI to circumvent a lot of the learning. They're
Mhm.
looking to use it to take a shortcut. I'm getting the sense that that's not the case for every student. That initially there was some, usage like that, a bit of abuse of AI. But what are you seeing? Are you seeing that happen, or what are you seeing students want to use AI for?
So interesting. I think we still have both. So of course there are certain kinds of assignments. If I was teaching a math class and giving a problem set, I'd be very concerned with them using AI, right?
Sure.
But I see both happening. So I see some of this positive. How do I think about being more creative, prompting that's happening with students, and then I also see, of course, if I give them an essay. It's very easy to write an essay with ChatGPT.
Right.
But I think the other piece here that's interesting to think about is not only are they asking those kinds of questions, but they also are having more of what we're now calling these parasocial kinds of conversations, right? So it's not just how do you help me write this essay, but it's also why does this part of the essay feel hard for me? How can I make this easier? So I think what we should really be thinking about is what are we getting worse at with AI as opposed to what can we do with AI? And also, what are we maybe needing to facilitate or should we be thinking about when it comes to parasocial learning kinds of opportunities as opposed to just how do we finish an assignment? So, some things I'm kind of thinking about.
Yeah, and it kind of connects back to the app you're talking about for the company. It would be interesting to have that student data to know how are they, because now again they're using all these different tools to ask those questions. It would be interesting to know what kind of questions they're asking to proactively address some of those concerns. But I do think it's an important message to share that not every student is out there trying to circumvent the learning, and it actually, kind of to your point, depends on what kind of assignment you're giving them. Now if it's something rote, I feel the
It's
inclination will be to, well, address that with something that makes it easier. But if it's genuinely interesting to them, then there's a natural curiosity that's coming out. So that's really interesting to hear, Kelly. Um, Dave, something I wanted to ask you that's happened since we last spoke is you recently had an interview with the Washington Business Journal. And I'm curious, what kind of message did you feel was important to share with the public? And what kind of lessons did you think, might resonate with leaders who are trying to figure out how to scale AI across their institutions responsibly?
So we're actually spending a lot of time providing training for corporations and for nonprofit organizations on how they can create a culture of AI adoption. And actually, Kelly and I just did one for one of the most prestigious nonprofit organizations in the United States based in New York. And what we're doing is we're basically trying to take the top people, the top layer, and teach them enough about AI and teach them enough about how to create their own tools that they can be AI curious and drive AI experimentation throughout the organization. I think in the same way that we've done that at Kogod, other organizations can do that themselves. So it's not about me being the smartest person to create something with AI. Kelli runs circles around me every day, technically. But it's about me as a leader or other leaders sending a signal that we want you to be AI curious. We want you to experiment, that failure is fine. And if you fail, just try something else. And so now we have, we want to send a signal that this AI culture is perhaps the most important thing you can do to empower people all over your organization to just make stuff up in the same way that Professor Frias made up a new way to approach an advertising class that's been taught for decades and decades in every business school.
That is, I think something our people are slowly starting to try to figure out how to do. Um, And maybe a tricky question and one that is difficult, but I know on people's minds, and maybe I'll start with you on this, Kelly, just as someone who
Mhm.
has recently adopted this new approach. Some of the faculty members I speak to, I think, are still quite concerned about how AI is going to affect their role and what they do day to day. And you're a great example of how you've leveraged the tool and maybe changed your role slightly, but in a positive way, a way that
Mhm.
does sound exciting and interesting. What are you hearing from your peers, and what sorts of things are helping put people at ease and helping them maybe recognize that this can be an advantage? It's not just a threat, so to speak.
I think you're right. There's still the spectrum of concerns that faculty have. Certainly, it's uncomfortable in learning all of these tools. It's kind of a third job
Mm.
in learning what's happening. But I do see that there's lots of us that are starting to think more about how we can shift some of our assignments in positive ways. So, where is there a place for autonomy in both the classroom and also our students' prospective jobs? Is I think an important conversation that we're having across campus. And then thinking about kind of these low risk, repetitive kinds of tasks that we may be able to ask students to build out, right? So I think those are some spaces. I also think we're in a place where we're starting to think about, we haven't talked about so much on the agentic operating system side, but as we think about how humans will interact with these agents, that's not going away. Can we shift the way we're thinking about teamwork and negotiations? If it is a human agent kind of interaction, is all important. But I think we on at least on our campus, we're a very curious group. There's lots of
Yeah.
experimentation that's happening, and we've also had, I think, to Dave's credit, a lot of space to do that. So whether that space comes from time or resources, we've had that space, which I think is absolutely critical.
That was something on my mind as well, is that, Dave, I think your team has done an amazing job of giving faculty the opportunity to do things like Kelly's done and take courses that they can use to upskill and reskill in some of these areas. Um, I know, to your point, Kelly, it can definitely feel like an additional um, part of their workload, but to have been given space to do it, I think, is a necessary part of the approach. Do you have anything you can share on that, Dave, on how
Sure.
to encourage faculty to use these tools, but also give them space to learn how?
So I'd say we're doing more than space. We're encouraging it, but we're also giving financial incentives. So we've been lucky enough to receive some grants and some very nice donations that we've been able to use to create incentives for faculty to take a new course, to experiment, to buy a new app. Um, we received some money from the Special Competitive Studies Project, which is Eric Schmidt's AI focused think tank. They do a great job focused on national security, the national security imperative of leadership on AI in the United States. And we handed out, I think, 19 mini grants to faculty and staff to be innovative in AI. And that ranges from our admissions team created an AI avatar that so every admitted student received a personalized greeting from an AI avatar along the lines of, you know, congrats, Imran, you've been accepted. We love the fact that you're interested in finance. We love the fact that you're AI curious. In fact, I'm not even a human. I'm an avatar of our associate dean. And when you come to Kogod, you're going to be using AI every day. Um, we are doing a lot of experimentation, again, with some other grants around learning outcomes. So I think a lot of universities now are starting to infuse AI into the classroom. There's a lot of kind of opacity. Nobody really knows the answer to how to measure learning outcomes about AI. Like, how do you measure when someone is AI literate or AI fluent? And then also with AI. So if you're taking the same physics class that's been taught for the last 40 years and you're introducing AI tools, tutors, study guides, assistants, are you actually increasing learning or are you decreasing learning? And we're doing a lot of experimentation around that.
That is
So
a
it's
yeah.
culture, it's money, it's incentives, and then it's also when you have someone like Kelli Frias doing this innovative stuff, having her on a podcast or having her speak to the faculty creates incentives for other faculty to say, I want to be like her. So that helps too.
It does. And again, thank you both for being here to share these insights because I think people need to know what their peers are doing and what kind of things are possible. And that is a huge theme we are trying to promote on the podcast here is highlighting stories like yours, Kelly, and highlighting the success and excitement that students are sharing as, these new approaches become something that they have available to them. And Kelly, you had mentioned kind of earlier that you actually have a podcast series of your own coming out
Yes.
soon. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that so we can keep in touch and stay up to date on your journey there?
Absolutely. So the podcast is entitled Deciding Health, and this is more related to the research I've been doing for the past several years on healthcare. And the goal behind the podcast is really to bring together the business side of decision making, so consumer decision making, with kind of the health infrastructure. So I'm co-hosting this podcast with Dan McCoy. He is the former CEO of Blue Cross of Texas. And so we're really hoping to bring together both the business and he's also a physician, that side with the consumer side. The other kind of special project that I've been working on, and I'll share this as well, my other plug, is I've also been posting a lot about AI and student success on both TikTok and Instagram. So I'm to my children's, I guess, probably embarrassment. There is also a place that you can find me online at Professor Frias. So
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, we'll put links for those of you who want to check out Professor Frias's TikTok and Instagram content. We'll make sure to include that in the description. I think that's a great way, again, to make it manageable and feel approachable to try some of these things, Kelly. So thank you for sharing that. We'll definitely be keeping an eye out for the podcast as well. That's exciting to hear. But one last question I wanted to try and squeeze in with the time I have left with both of you today is about the future, about what you're hoping to see happen in the next year or so. Um, I know that's a little difficult to predict. Every time I now talk to people about what they expect for the future, a lot of people are saying, well, it's hard to know what to
mm.
expect in the next month. But based on the tools we have available now, the projects and initiatives you're working on, maybe I'll start with you again, Kelly, here, and then hear your thoughts, Dave. What are you hoping to see in the next year or so? What kind of things would make you excited?
So for me, I would say most of our students have some sort of passion project or creative outlet. As you mentioned, you do as well. And I'm really excited to see what we kind of think of and how this evolves when it comes to solo entrepreneurship. So I think a lot of students are starting to think about how can I use these AI tools as an individual and can I build that out, even if it isn't the kind of traditional business, but how do I build out and share my creative side? I'm really excited to see where that lands in the next year.
I am too. You never know what can come from that. So I think that's a really great vision, Kelly. I'm excited to see what your students do as well. And Dave, same question for you. I would just like to preface it with that the entire AU team is extremely humble. When Dave talks about the funding that the institution has raised, it's significant funding for faculty, scholarships, and hands-on learning. So, with what you've been able to create a momentum here, Dave, what are you hoping to see happen in the next year or so?
Okay. I love the question. So I have four things on my mind. I don't know if we can succeed, but we're going to be ambitious. And if we fail, that's okay. Number one is the most ambitious, which is really changing the role of the teacher and the instructor in education. So that the age of an instructor standing in front of the classroom, imparting knowledge and being the source of all wisdom, I think is dead. And instead, with AI and people like Kelly, um, the role of the instructor can be more a facilitator, coach, mentor, and enabler of learning. We have a professor, Tommy White, who, again, he called me and said, I'm going to try something, it'd be a total failure. He created 2 courses with no books, no articles, no assigned reading. It's all AI prompts, and it creates a path of individualized learning for our students to pick what they want to learn about, and then the AI tool leads them to find their own reading, their own videos, their own source materials, and an individual path towards learning. Second is I want to try to share best practices in teaching in a very, very visible way. Third, we're very, very focused on this issue of assessment of learning outcomes. I think it's an area of great uncertainty that nobody's really figured out. And finally, I, I want to pursue this idea of having students graduate with a portfolio of things they've created in a business school environment in the same way that a photographer or an architect has a portfolio. So I don't know if we can get 2 done or 3 done or 1 done, but we're going to try.
Well, it speaks again to your leadership style, Dave, and even just admitting that, hey, these are the ambitious goals we're after, and they're incredible goals. I wish all the success possible to the AU team in those. I think that that's the right. I'm excited about that road that AU is going down to make that type of learning possible. I think that would excite a lot of learners, and not just new students, like Kelly said. Um, Adult learners, people who are trying to think of new things and new ideas. That's a really exciting approach to learning, and one I hope to see evolve as well. And one just last insight I'll share is I've been hearing a lot about how to adapt the assessment of learning in this age of AI. And I spoke to someone at a conference recently. I was actually with Casey Evans in London last year as AU presented their work for the QS Award there. So again, extremely humble team doing incredible things across the world. One individual there mentioned something I'd not heard of, the triple feedback loop, which was, learning information, being able to explain what you learned, and then being able to apply what you learned in a new situation. And I think of your students there, Callie, and what they're learning and now taking out into the world. So I think they're doing exactly that. They're learning skills that are going to last them throughout their lives. So thank you both for sharing these visions, these stories of hope and excitement in higher ed. And Dave, I hope we can have you and your team back on again down the road to
Love
continue
to.
learning about the AU journey.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
both. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Again, keep an eye out for the links in this post to learn more about the work happening at AU and to connect with both our guests today. Thank you both again for making time to chat with me.